All right. So, welcome to episode number 3 of the Rooster's Crow podcast that looks to engage with ideas, people, and culture that, like the Rooster's Crow, are sending out signals of warning and caution, but also signals of hope, discernment, and viable ways forward. And in this spirit, I can't think of a more appropriate guest to have on than Jonathan Pageau. Jonathan is a father, a husband, an Orthodox Christian, an Icon Carver, and along with his brother Matthieu, chief archeologist of ancient symbolism, that for some reason is making a significant impact on the cultural zeitgeist here in 2020. So, Jonathan, thanks for coming on.
That's great to talk to you. We've met a few times, kind of very in a short manner, so it's good to have a good conversation with you. So I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, likewise. So I guess kind of just starting out, I have a question in the spirit of what my introduction and why is symbolism appearing in the world now? And how did the name and the idea of the symbolic world come about?
Well, I think that materialism is running its course and it's kind of self-devouring, even in the sciences. You know, we're reaching the point where I like to phrase it that for a few hundred years, people have stood in the space of, let's say, first person space, this conscious space of experience, and have used the tools of that space to analyze the world and to do a pretty good job at it in terms of material causality and, predictability in terms of material effects. And they thought, in a way, the people who were engaged, not everybody, but a lot of people engaging in this thought that this was, they were going to win this fight, and for the fight to kind of encompass all of reality, and to be able to explain all of reality. And so in the moment that they were winning, they realized that there was one thing that they hadn't analyzed yet, which is this person, this kind of experience, this intelligence, or the possibility of rationality, or all of this kind of first person experience that we have as human people. And so when they turned their eyes back on that, on the eye that was looking, all of a sudden things started to get really loopy, and all of the certainty that they thought they had, not that it was thrown into chaos, but rather that all of a sudden the notion of the frame started to appear, the idea that there are frames of perceptions and that we need category structures, that, language started to appear again as being important. And so I think that that's the space that we're in. A lot of people have taken this down the postmodern route, but I believe the more fruitful way to go down this route is to explore traditional thinking once again, and to notice that the ancients, whether it's even the Greek philosophers, but also the ancient religious thinkers, this is what they were talking about. Like this is what they were referring to when they were talking about causality, about meaning, and the way that they interpreted the world. So I think that it's the right moment. We're just falling in the right moment where now people are able to even understand what we're talking about. And 50 years ago, the things we're talking about in terms of symbolism, a lot of people just wouldn't even have known what the subject is, because they were too taken up by their vision. Their frame was so strong that they weren't even able to see it. And we see that still today. I mean, we talked a little earlier off camera about these discussions with atheists that I've been having, and you can feel that in some of them, that they don't see it. They still don't see it. You try to point out the frame, you try to point it out, but they it's hard. It's really hard to see the water you're swimming in. It's very difficult. And so I think that that's why this is the moment. But even those conversations are great for people who are watching and are right on the verge of getting it. And so they can see the other person not understanding. And so it can help nudge them towards this kind of vision of this symbolic vision, I would call it. I know you wanted to know also why the symbolic world. I think it's a play on a lot of things. Mostly it's to talk about the world of symbolism, but also the notion that the world itself is symbolic, and that, if you look at it through the right frame, it's not, symbolism doesn't oppose factuality, but rather encompasses the world of factuality as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. And I see the term symbolism as how you use it as kind of not in the same description, but how Heidegger uses being. Sometimes I was I'd read Heidegger and I'm like, man, I wish he used a different word. I mean, it has a lot of kind of connotations to it. So maybe we can try some. What are some synonyms to symbolism as you use it?
Well, I really like John Vervaeke's term relevance realization. I think it's a great term because it's a more technical term, but it also encompasses what it is we're talking about. I think that indeed the idea of gestalt is a good term that was developed recently. The notion, I think in terms of Heidegger, it's mostly Dasein, the idea that being is let's say it's tied up with care, that
Hmm.
a being, the being in the sense of, this experience that we have is manifested itself in care. And so that's the relevance realization, that the world unfolds itself through categories, but the categories aren't abstract categories. The categories are categories of care. They're categories of attention. They're reasons for attention. And
Hmm.
so I think that all of that bound up together can help us understand, at least from a modern perspective, help us understand what we're talking about in terms of symbolism. The ancients were more top down, and I'm more top down, to be honest, like as a person, the way I think. But I've been pushed, I think, because of different conversations, to be able to think of it more a little bit bottom up, and those terms are helpful to help the kind of materialists or people coming out of materialism to understand what we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and I think that this more ancient and broader, encompassing idea of truth comes to mind when I think of how I think of symbolism, in a sense of where heaven and earth meet appropriately, right? Where they cohere is a truth event, in a sense. But when you think of that in terms of our scientific materialist perspective, we always think as truth as corrective, a truth as in a scientific terms. And I think just continuing to cultivate this symbolic intuition discloses a new way of looking at truth that has been effaced through postmodernism, which I cut my teeth on intellectually. I went to school and studied it intensely and loved it. And I saw that in one of your conversations. You said that you studied postmodernism and you weren't thinking or looking at it as some kind of destructive force that is looking to destroy metaphysics as such. Is just interesting and cool and unique ideas that I think were meaningful for the time. But kind of in that line of thinking, the big thing that postmodernism looks to destroy, in a sense, is ideologies, but it ends up kind of repeating them. So how do we know that this type of symbolism isn't just one of many ideologies out there?
Yeah. Well, I think that the way that we can understand that this symbolism isn't an ideology, first of all, is that it's not moral in the first place. There's morality downline from it, but it's not moral. It's structural. It really is a pattern. And uh, and so what you can see, for example, in the pattern, that there are, it's almost like, in Ecclesiastes or in Kohelet, the idea that everything has its place, and if things are in their place in the proper way, then they're good. But that if they're out of place, then they become a problem. And so you can understand how there can be excesses of any aspect of the pattern. And so because of that, what it does is it creates a kind of balanced view, where you have a role for that which is the margin, you have a role for that which is outside, and you have a kind of non-duality, even ultimately, where the images of the furthest outside, you could say, actually strangely meet up with the images of the highest. And so you have this total system that kind of encompasses everything, but is also has hierarchy, but it also has something which transcends hierarchy at the same time. All of that, and also because it's just the symbolic system is not just Christian. And that's one of the things that I've been trying to maybe emphasize a little more recently, that I believe that Christianity offers a very, very, let's say, a key in the symbolic pattern. I think it offers a disclosure that makes it the truest or the most revealed, you could say, version of it. But the structure that we're talking about is there in Vedanta Hinduism, it's there in Buddhism, it's there in Taoism. It's the same structure as you find in Greek mythology. It's just basically a condensation of the experience of reality. So because of that, I don't see how it can be an ideology, because it's also not telling you, it's really not telling you what to do in a specific sense. It's trying to have this perception of where things should fit in the puzzle rather. But some
Yeah.
people will see it, maybe some people won't like it, because a lot of people don't like, some people don't like reality. I understand it's reality is hard, but a lot of people don't like reality. And so people will not like some of the patterns that it shows, because they want to upend those patterns. They want to destroy them, or they want to act as revolutionary agents within this system, within the pattern, let's say.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is what kind of hit me in the last couple of years, is this idea, in postmodernism, it's that hierarchies themselves are inherently bad. But the idea is, you can't have being in the world without hierarchy. You can't have hierarchies. You like certain music more than others. You like certain colors, right? It's how you kind of determine, what your values are. And destroying hierarchies as such seems like such an obviously bad idea that I kind of resonated with, a few years ago, in a sense. So it's like, and I see a lot of good, smart, well-meaning people take these ideas, and that's kind of the, the strange part of what we're seeing here.
Well, one of the things that's important to understand, and I think that's one of the things that I've been trying to point to as well, is that there's certain structures that are just there. You can't do anything about it. They're there. And so if you try to get rid of them, they're going to come back. They're going to return in a strange they're going to return upside down, or they're going to return in a skewed way. And so one of the things I've been wanting to do is to point out that, for example, like, you can't avoid hierarchy. So if you try to get rid of hierarchy, you end up with an upside down hierarchy. You don't end up with equality. There is no equality. It always ends up being an upside down thing. And so it's better to rather understand the hierarchy and to participate in it. And then also, then you can palliate against the negative aspects of the hierarchy. You can help, compensate for some of the dangerous aspects of what the hierarchy involves. But if you just say, I want to upend it, I want to get rid of it, then you're going to end up a little tyrant, and you're going to install a new hierarchy that is going to be more tyrannical than the one before, and is going to be upside down. So it's going to be very fragile. And the reason why it's going to be more tyrannical than the one before is because it's going to be upside down. Something unnatural has to be enforced, like massively enforced. And so natural things need a little bit of nudging, but they rarely have to be like massively enforced. If they have to be massively enforced, then we're in trouble.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think you could practically kind of boil this down to, and it's ironic that, Christ, in a sense, inaugurated this idea or instantiation of the left, right? The left's appropriate role is to identify when the hierarchy has become corrupt, right? And it seems like, and the relationship between the left and the right, I see as kind of similar to the relationship between heaven and earth. And the balance of the two is kind of where you see the appropriate way of that things work out at so many levels. And this is something that, recently has come up on me, is the idea you can ascertain truth in a very accurate way by looking at it at all the different levels of reality. We talk about the individual, the communal, and then in terms of you can look at how your body interacts with the world and apply that to how a nation interacts with the world. And then you can look at something like the issue of borders, right? You can look at the issues of borders as you look at the borders of your body, right? And if you take in food, indiscriminate food, processed food from anywhere and everywhere, that's going to disintegrate your body, the identity that is James, right? But if you only eat one type of food, and I talk about this with Neil, if you only, so it's this idea of purity and, border control and open borders, there is a way to ascertain what's the right way to look at a border. And it's like, so that's what I like about this system. It's so practical in so many different ways. And I guess that leads to my next question, so how do we bridge the gap between the highest and lowest in terms of intellectual sophistication with regards to the implications of symbolism, right? We're interested in it in terms of, we're interested in philosophy and psychology, but how do you grok this with folks that, are not interested in this intellectual sense, maybe haven't graduated high school, but it will make an impact on them?
Yeah, you obviously don't explain it. I always say that explaining symbolism is a last ditch resort. Like it's not a good, we're not in a good place when you have to explain symbolism. It's actually a bad sign. And so for people who are maybe not the most intellectual types, that symbolism is actually easier for them. It's because it's intuitively grasped. They don't have this intellect which is fighting inside them to take up all the space. And so the way that it has to be, but we need the kind of intellectual types as well, because they're the ones, they will always be the ones running the show, you would say, or in terms of directing culture and creating the waves in culture. And so the way to do it is through stories through embodied experiences, rituals, celebrations. The liturgical year is the ultimate example of that, but encouraging celebration, encouraging feasts, all of this stuff was the way. And you can see it like in the Middle Ages. I think it was something like people had something like it was a crazy amount of days, like 130 days off or something during the year, because they were constantly celebrating this saint, celebrating this thing. They're always celebrating. And so that's the way you do it. And that's the way people are doing it now. That's why Hollywood is using the storytelling to influence culture. That's why they're using video games to influence culture. All of the places of storytelling, and then also the place of celebration that say, what are we allowed to celebrate today? You can understand. If you understand what the world is, you can see what we're allowed to celebrate and what we're not so allowed to celebrate, or that it's suspicious that if you celebrate that. And so that's the way to do it. So what we don't just need people who understand symbolism. And if you follow what I'm doing, you'll see that sometimes it looks chaotic because I have the multi-pronged things going out. But ultimately, there's this idea that we need people who understand symbolism, but we need people who are producing symbolism as well. We need people who are writing stories, and we also need our clergy. We need the people that are in authority in terms of religious authority to understand the importance of what they're doing, and to understand the deep impact of the acts that we're posing and the celebrations that we're involved in.
Yeah. Excellent. And this, again, it moves right to my kind of next question I've had is, so how can you best articulate what happens in the midst of liturgy when you're at church and you're worshiping, right? And what is going on there?
Well, you can see, if you look at just the elements of the liturgy, you can see what's going on. And so the entire liturgy, there are so many ways to look at it. This is not the only way. Be careful. I'm not saying this is the interpretation of liturgy, but one of the things, for example, that's happening during liturgy is there's a concentration. And so you're ascending a mountain during liturgy, and it's built that way. So at first, like for example, in the Orthodox liturgy, we have two parts of the liturgy. We have the liturgy of the word, which is directed kind of towards the outside, you could say, or at the bottom of the mountain. And then we have the liturgy of the faithful, which is above. And as we're moving, we actually both cohere and exclude, which a lot of people won't like that, but that's how the world works, right? So you both cohere and exclude. So we cohere together as the body of Christ, and then we also kind of leave at the bottom of the mountain those things that aren't ready to be up in the top of the mountain. And so as we're going up, you'll have the catechumen will be left behind, left at the bottom. Then we'll close the doors. You'll hear the doors, right? So you close the doors, and then we're moving in. And then as we're moving in, then we start to celebrate the mysteries. We start to celebrate the things that unite us. And we ultimately now start to then, not only that, but we start to unite ourselves with that which is above us. And so you'll hear, we who represent the cherubim, and then it talks about how, Christ is carried by the order of angels down to us. And so we're coming together. We're celebrating that which unites us, but then we're also participating in it, in that which is above us. And so then that culminates into the moment of communion, where we do something which is both, you could call it a kind of sacrifice, but it's also a meal. And so we're sitting together and we're sharing the most basic thing that humans can share, which is food, but it's heavenly food. If you look at like the priest, for example, one of the things he does when he's making the communion bread is he'll actually make little pieces of bread for every aspect of the church. He'll cut out these little pieces of bread and put it on the paten. So there'll be like, for all the different orders of bishops and everything. And you can see, like, if you look at a paten that has been prepared, it has all these pieces of bread. I don't even know like all the which pieces are for what, but they have all these different pieces of bread. And so it's like a microcosm, it's like a cosmos that is on the paten. And so the cosmos is gathered in us, gathered together, gathered into this point, which is where communion happens. And then we come together and participate in that point. And so it really is it's a participation in how the world exists, really. I mean, and I'm not saying that just as it's technically participating in how the world exists. Like it's not just a metaphor in terms of, it's not just like a poetic thing we're doing. We're actually holding the world together, right, and participating in how all of reality works. And so the way that this works is kind of coming together, these levels of microcosms that come together and that we participate in. Then that goes out into the world, and that becomes a way we participate in everything that has both multiplicity and unity, which means everything has that pattern, has to have this coherence and exclusion, this moving towards its purpose, so that it can actually exist. And then, participating in this hierarchy of being.
Yeah. It's kind of a trick question. I don't know that it's possible to articulate that. And I asked my, I was trying to get back into the Orthodox Church. I used to go when I was younger. My family's Greek Orthodox. And then, I stopped going maybe at 12, and, my folks were immigrants here. They moved here in the restaurant business, go figure. And they stopped going. And then I just didn't consider it for so long. And then just recently, in the last year and a half, I've been trying to get back. So the Orthodox Church here, I've been talking with the priest there, and we've had a few conversations. And I asked them that question. I'm like, how can I explain liturgy to my wife? It's strange, so strange from the outside coming in. My son, he wants to go, and I want to go, and we were all set to go. And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And then, and with the masks, and they're wearing masks, and they're pretty strict there. And it's like, I talk with the priest. I'm like, I want to go with my family and participate authentically. I don't want them to go because they have to go, because dad's making them go. I want them to go and experience it. Right. And, he's like, James, I know, this is the devil, trying to make you not go to church. And I said, you know what, you're probably right in a sense, but I just don't feel like I can do that right now. So I'm trying to kind of figure out how to best approach that in a sense. So kind of in the midst of that here.
That's tough, man. I'm sorry. COVID has been crazy. It's been really hard on everybody. I think some people who follow what I'm doing have probably seen that I hadn't been to church since the beginning of COVID. Like when COVID started, everything locked down, and then they kind of weirdly opened it, but you had to like reserve in advance, and it was super complicated. And so I ended the masks and all of this and single spoons for communion. And so I was like, I can't do this. I just couldn't. But then a few weeks ago, my daughter's, what's the word? What's the word for godfather? Is that in English? Yeah. So my daughter's parrain. Yeah. So my daughter's godfather, he had seen the interview that I did with Rodrier where I said I invited church. And so he kindly like wrote me a message. He said, look, it's working. If you come, like everything's set up. Like we found, because the church I was going to lost its building because of COVID. So for a while they didn't even have a place to be. And he said, we have a place, we're going, everything is fine. So you have to go, you have to come. Like you can't keep doing this. So I was like, all right. I took the encouragement. I went to confession, and then I went to communion. And so the mask is hard, but it was still like a great relief to my soul, to be honest. So I've been the past 2 Sundays, and And so, yeah, it even despite the difficulty of the mask, it was definitely definitely relief for me, like to go back. And so hopefully that will continue unless they lock us down. Like, they might, because they're talking about it constantly. So who knows? But
So
I would
you got,
encourage
yeah.
you. Look, it's hard because it's not something for me. It was something that was a habit, which I lost because of COVID. But for you, it's almost like you have to start something new, you know, climbing a massive, you're supposed to start something new with your hands tied behind your back, like climbing up a massive cliff. So it's really makes it way more difficult to do. So I don't know, man. It's tough, you know.
Yeah.
You should talk to Jacob Russell, because he kind of had the same experience where he was right about to enter the church and then COVID happened. Then he got baptized like during COVID. And so it's been difficult for him as well. But he met with his priest, and I feel like he's found a ground, like a middle ground where he can participate in the life of the church despite this madness.
Yeah. Yeah. So are you guys in lockdown right now? Do you guys have a lot of cases in your area where you're at?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
they have the thing with it's really frustrating. It's difficult not to feel like a lot of the information is manipulated to just scare us, because they keep talking about the number of cases. They don't. The deaths have gone up during winter, but then the deaths go up. It's hard to know what's real, because the deaths go up in winter during flu season here, and
Mm-hmm.
winter, obviously people die during winter here way more. Elderly people die during the winter way more than during the summer. It makes sense because it's a really harsh situation. So it's hard to know what's really happening. And they're canceled Christmas, so we're not allowed. They're actually going to put up roadblocks and everything during Christmas. We're not allowed to visit each other. And despite that, like, you go to Costco and there's like hundreds of people and they're all next to each other. And so it's just it's hard to feel like there isn't like a weird. The best case scenario is that there's like a mass hysteria in terms of what's happening. And worst case scenario is very scarier. So it's probably better not to entertain it too much.
Yeah. No, I had the similar experience when, we were told, don't go to your family's house on Thanksgiving. And the CDC guidelines were actually bring your own utensils, bring your own food, bring your own plates. The CDC is saying this most absurd thing. And then I had to get some salt for my water softener. So I had to go to Walmart after Thanksgiving. And I took a picture. The parking lot, there must have been 1,000 cars literally in the parking lot. There was nowhere to park. It's one of those super Walmarts.
Yeah.
And you go in there and it is a labyrinth. It is just, there's thousands of people in there. And that's been the case almost every day, right?
Yeah.
And there's nothing said about that. But gathering for Christmas and for Thanksgiving, it goes against the CDC guidelines. And to me, it's such an absurd reality. Is it that people don't want to see that, how absurd it is, because then they'll have to deal with the implications of what's going on? Or why can't people like see that? I don't get that.
Yeah, it's really difficult. The same with like the closing down of restaurants. It's like, so you close down the restaurants, but you don't close down all these other things. It's a lot of it is, it's just very odd. I agree. I think that there's some I think that whether or not it's planned, whether it's like just a kind of emergent phenomena, you would say, those also have principality. It's like whether it's humanly planned or it's some kind of, it's actually running a program that's happening. It's definitely inaugurating a massive shift, like a massive shift in the way that we perceive society, the way that we perceive our relationships to each other, the way that we perceive the role of order and the role of government in our life, and the intrusion that we allow the state to have. All of this is happening. So, and it doesn't even have to be like a mass conspiracy, but it's definitely happening. And what's on the other end of this is not, it's just not pretty.
Yeah. I think it's not pretty for most people, but I think that there are, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn talks about how to navigate these waters when, in Russia, the news was called, Pravda, which means truth. And everybody knew it was completely false, but they couldn't say anything because you could get shipped to the gulag. And, we're not there yet, but I think there are ways to have discussions and talk with people, your family, your friends, conversations like this, to address the topic and ask questions so people can start thinking themselves and start, I think having the
Yeah,
conversation.
we're not there yet, but we're really close. Like
Yeah.
there are a few journalists I think people should follow just in terms of, I'm not even American, but in terms of, because everything's happening in America. So YouTube, Facebook, all this is in the United States. And so American politics have a lot relevance to us, especially who are online like this. But there are a few journalists I think that are worth following, like Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, who have now exited the mainstream, but who, because they're not like, they're left leaning, so they're actually morally, like intellectually in line with the people that now they're fighting. It makes it helps to read people like that, because they're not just propagandistic. They're not just acting for propaganda reasons, because the right has its propaganda too, and so they're not just acting for propaganda, and they're now, it's like they saw the problem on their own side. Now they're leaving it, and now they're pointing at the problems on their own side. And so they have a voice, which is rare. And so they've been pointing out at the insanity of what YouTube and Facebook and the platforms have been doing, and how they're using straight out of 1984 tactics of public manipulation, using, saying the opposite, using, portraying your enemy as doing what you're doing, what you portray your enemy as doing, all of this insanity that is going on. So I encourage people to follow that, just to understand what's happening, because if you don't, then you're just not going to see it coming. All of a sudden it's going to hit you, and it's already happening to a lot of people, but it's a scary, like my YouTube channel is definitely been marginalized. And people know that, because if they type my name up, they get the clips channel, but they don't get my channel, which is very odd, because my channel has 80,000 subscribers and my clips channel is like a 1,000 or a few thousand. And so you can see that in the algorithm that I've just been marginalized. And so one day that'll be more and more, and one day we'll all we'll just get banned at some point. That seems like that's inevitable. Get ready for that, people.
Sure. And it's like, and then what, then have to adapt some more. But just to kind of, I subscribe to both Matt Taibbi and Glenn Greenwald, and I think they embody what the left is supposed to do. They're supposed to look at tyranny and point to it. There is tyranny, you know what I'm saying? And the right is supposed to recapitulate and help build a new hierarchy. And I think that's getting short-circuited with this onslaught of digital and social media. And I think that at the root of that are algorithms. And there's this quote from that documentary, The Social Dilemma. Someone quoted, said, an algorithm is an opinion in a code, right? So how can we understand algorithms from a symbolic framework?
So I think that the algorithms are working. They're working similarly to a kind of how can I say this, like a crystal ball or a form of divination. And so that's what social media seems to be doing, especially Google acts as a form of divination. And so because the algorithms, they're not the opinion of one person. This is what's important, is that it's hard when people think that there's necessarily like someone sitting up there with a certain color hat and who is, let's say just enforcing top down the way that things work. I mean, you can imagine something like principalities doing that, like that disembodied spirits, you could say, or disembodied patterns doing that. But it's not really that simple to think that it's an actual conspiracy. So what happens is that it ends up being like a pool where, this chaotic pool of motion, and then in that will appear, let's say the pattern will appear in that kind of chaotic thing. And so it's not that necessarily one person is directing it, but then everybody is kind of pushing and pulling and pushing and pulling. And then there's this weird emergent thing that happens, which ends up looking like the body of a principality. And so that's why I say it's almost like divination. It's almost like necromancy. It's like a weird form of necromancy where you take all these dead things like data and whatever, and you gather them together, and through a magic formula, they kind of take a life on their own. And I don't think that nobody controls those algorithms. I don't think so. I don't think they even know. They launch, because you can see sometimes where you can actually know sometimes that it gets out of control because weird things start happening. Like so all of a sudden it's like, certain videos start disappearing and then they reappear, or then, people get demonetized massively and then the next day they get remonetized, and that it's just they launched the algorithm and now it's doing all this damage that they didn't plan on, and now they have to try to come in and try to fix it and try to rearrange it. And so it's a scary thing, because it really is taking up this kind of bottom up thing, like I said, of this pool of water, or this crystal ball, or this throwing the bones, and then the pattern kind of comes in and manifests itself, and the side effects of that pattern are things that they didn't understand. And that's why, like, if you look at someone like Mr. Facebook, he's you can see that he's a techie, he's a nerd, he's a dweeb, he doesn't have moral understanding, and so he doesn't know what to do. He's got this massive the biggest thing in the world, and now he has no idea how to deal with it, because he's a tool of something else. Like he created this Frankenstein, and now he doesn't know how to control it. He can't. It's too late now. Yeah. And the way that they did it, it's easy. It's related to symbolism. The way that they did it is that they created an attention economy. They everything's based on attention, and everything online is based on attention. And so they have profit to maintain your attention, and that is what is creating all the madness. Is the fact that they just want quantity of attention, not quality of attention. They just want quantity. So because they want quantity of attention, then everything about it, whether it's porn, whether it's rage, whether it's all the passions are coming to the fore, and all of the ideological madness is coming to the fore. All of this is coming to the fore because the internet asks of us quantity of attention, and has no way of discerning quality of attention. Absolutely no way of doing that.
Yeah, I think you hit on a key insight there with the relationship between quantity and quality. And I see that as the relationship between heaven and earth, right? Meaning and matter, in a sense. And are there ways to reorganize the incentive structures to pose these algorithms to do good?
No, I don't think so. This is, well, look, it's not the algorithm. The thing is that in reality, the way that quality of attention has always been for the few. It's never been a mass thing. And so let's say the monk in his cell, and who spends his whole day reading scripture and reading the church fathers, who spend 8 hours of liturgical practice nonstop, that is not the most people. It will never be most people. And so in the past, the world was organized. The people at the bottom, let's say the people who are more distracted, who are more chaotic, they had the capacity to recognize those who had undivided attention in the right direction and who had quality attention. They had a capacity to recognize those. And so they would elevate them as holy people, as, spiritual fathers. All of this would happen. And so because of that, the world would just lay itself out normally, because you would have a few monks at the top who were just praying all day. And then you'd have clergy who were praying a little bit, but would also be involved with people. And then you had the people who would still, they would still be involved in their passions, and they would still be drunkards, and they would still cheat on their wives. And all of this would still happen. But because the world was ordered properly, and people could recognize those above them as having the best attention, and would be able to nonetheless, even though they themselves were not there, they would be able to recognize it. Then it would create this normal hierarchy of reality. But because we have destroyed this spiritual hierarchy, or we're trying to destroy it or invert it, then it makes it almost impossible. It makes it very difficult. And I don't know, like it's gonna happen a little bit, even in the online space. It's gonna happen. There's gonna be places where it's happening, but the mass of it is so big, like the mass of it, and then the the fact that all these companies that are managing the online space, the fact that all they want is quantity of attention, and also because they are ideologically possessed, also they've been infiltrated by ideologically possessed people, then there's not a lot of hope.
Yeah.
The best we're going to see, honestly, is to be an upside down religion. And it seems like it's already there, maybe, but it's going to formalize at some point. It's going to start to formalize, and we're going to have we're just going to have like a weird satanic religion.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'd laugh. I was laughing in the worst place. Sorry about that.
I think Father Seraphim Rose, prophesized this exactly what's happening here.
Yeah.
And one of my questions that kind of speaks to what you were just saying there is, trying to get rid of heaven, meaning, metaphysics, religion has not only been futile, it's been disastrous as we see monstrous versions of these categories pop up in their stead, like weeds or like whack-a-mole, and these little kind of, that are just turning into these monstrous inversions. I think the answer I think is art. And I think what you're doing with art, and I think maybe I can just share this quote from Wyndham Lewis with you and kind of see what your thoughts are, because art seems to, in terms of the fool as well, like it to invert the hierarchy, or when the hierarchy becomes too calcified, to show it, and it becomes too loose to reverse it. So I think that mechanism is important. So there's a Wyndham Lewis quote. Let me see if I can find it here. It goes, the artist is engaged in writing a detailed history of the future because he's the only one who can live in the present. And then the question I have is, what is the relationship between art and time, and maybe art in our time?
One of the things we can notice that can help us understand what you're talking about, and maybe that also that people can see it, is the way that art went in the modern age, like the way that art developed. And so art manifested itself as this decoupling in the 20th century, and maybe even before, as this massive decoupling. And so something which actually its ultimate purpose would have been a kind of coupling of heaven and earth, a kind of manifestation of principles in the material world or in the world of phenomena, ended up being a decoupling. And it happened on several levels. It happened in this idea of decoupling what they call high art with low art. And so in a traditional world, art was the application of these principles into the world. And so everything in art, usefulness, beauty, and meaning were together. Mm-hmm. Right? And so the idea of creating objects of art that had no relationship to function was just not something ancient people could ever think about. And so we've decoupled it. So we have products of mass production and of industrial use, and then we have art, which is this decoupled world of narratives, of objects, of music that have no connection to reality. Right? The idea of sitting in a concert hall, listening to a concert, is something that a medieval person would not even have imagined. Like, would you just sit there and listen to music? Like, no, music, you have music at a party, you have music at a wedding, at an event, at a liturgy, you have music to dance to, mm-hmm. At least that's something, but just sit there and listen to music, that's such a modern thing. And so that decoupling happened. And then within art, the decoupling also happened. So even mm-hmm. in the high art, so you have, in the modern age, people think of that the modern age it's mostly the kind of deconstruction of traditional art. And so you have a kind of chaotic element. You have Dada, surrealism, and you have these Jackson Pollock, throwing his paint on paintings and everything. But you also have massive tyranny that happened at the same time. Brutalist architecture was a kind of tyrannical imposition of ideology on space. And you read some of the modern architects, for example, who talk about how they wish they could design the people in their buildings, right? Mm-hmm. It's like they wish that they could nail the chairs to the floor so that their designs would be impeccable. And so you have both this kind of crazy chaotic thing, but also this like massive tyrannical movement of art. So this is what we're noticing. So in order to be able to recapture, we have to be able to first off heal ourselves from this problem. Heal ourselves from the problem, first of all, and you see it even in liturgical artists. To my sadness, like I see sometimes a kind of a kind of desire to be gallery artists, the desire to make high art and to have their paintings in shows and have their paintings in catalogs and all of this stuff. But it's like, that's not the highest thing, right? The highest thing is really to have an object which participates in the liturgy and in, the celebration of the life of a saint or of Christ. Like, that is the most embodied, real, and highest thing at the same time. So we need to, first of all, be able to to try to get out of the problem of the high, and also the problem of just understanding art as entertainment, which is one of the massive diseases of our world too. And so there's nothing, like I said, I always say there's nothing wrong with entertainment. And so, but we need to be able to, first off, heal from this decoupling. And then once we've healed from it, then I think a lot of artists can create things which will have meaning, which will engage the world. And even if you write stories that are more fictional, then those fictional stories, you'll write them with a purpose, and not a purpose in the sense of ideological, or in the sense of kind of writing propaganda or something like that, because those always stink. But a purpose of embodying heaven in a vehicle, and then being a place where people can recognize and participate in the pattern to a certain extent, to at least at a certain level. And so I definitely think we definitely need artists to heal from this disease of art that has happened in the modern age, and move towards a more integrated vision of art.
Yeah, well said. And I think you're doing that. I think that, that art will help create the healing as well. So kind of bridge the gap in terms of, I know that's what I see a lot that you're doing with your artwork, which is beautiful, and it's meaningful, and it's significant, and it's got an impact in a sense. And I think more of that. And I think we can, if we leverage these technologies to connect people that are doing this type of work, and it's not going to be spread to everyone immediately, but I think, happening in little pockets across the country, across the globe, I think it's going to happen in this decentralized, localized way. And then from there, it'll, ripple out in a sense. Because the way that, I see the symbolism has worked in my life, and I started praying about a year ago, and the, praying, in the morning, I actually have a Orthodox prayer book for kids that I started with, and I moved up to this prayer book. And then my son, who's 6, he absolutely, he'll remind me to pray if we forget at night. And when we're in the car, we'll pray on the way to work, and which something that seems, so archaic, but the effects that it has are hard to articulate. And it's not like I get more things, or, I get more stuff that I wanted, but it has this effect where it has helped, heal relationships within my family. And then it helps with, focusing on what's right. And it helps with real relevance realization. Right?
Yeah. And that's the thing. If you're not a religious person, and you don't believe in God or whatever, to understand that in terms of attention, to even understand prayer just as attention, to say, okay, so you start your day out, and then when you start your day out, you attend to something which is beyond you. You attend to your sins by confessing and asking for forgiveness. You attend to the people you love and care about by interceding for them. It's like, even if obviously I do believe in God, but if you didn't, you would still see that this is the way the world is set right. That, think about the difference between that and, getting up in the morning and right away, I don't know, like watching some series on Netflix or something. It's like, how are you going to then, your day is going to be you'll be distracted, right? And so prayer is a way to focus attention on the things that matter, and also be grateful. Gratitude is the solution to so many problems, right? Celebration and gratitude is one of the ways that the world coheres together and holds together.
Yeah, no, well said. And this morning I had a weird, uncanny feeling of gratitude. So every morning, right when I wake up, I have the Jesus prayer. I just start saying it. Right. And I had this come up on me of how grateful and how blessed I am to have this family around me and this unit, and how much I love them. And I don't, not think about it, but, and express it, or, consider it as much. And it was such a good, an uncanny feeling that just kind of kind of
Mm.
came out of nowhere. And so I started a new job. I work with in pediatric home health. So we take care of kids that are straight out of the hospital. We provide
Mm.
24/7 nursing. So I work in a little office with 2 or 3 women in there, and we just were talking in a sense. And long story short, there's this nurse who comes in. She's really religious, so they're cautious about her. But she's like, James, every time she comes in, she lights up the room, right? And
Mm.
she came in, and it happened, and it started this conversation. And long story short, I got them an Orthodox prayer book, and these people are, had bad relationships with their churches or have just this disdain or indifference, but they asked for it and they started doing their prayers. And I'm like, it's the weirdest thing in a corporate environment for that to happen. I'm telling my wife, she's like, what the heck? I'm like, I don't know. But it's just, I think people respond, or they see the quality of the heart that happens when you engage with prayer and with,
Mm.
these types of, worship and prayer, right? It does something to the heart, which is hard to express. But when you engage with someone, you can see the Holy Spirit in them. I think this woman did that and is doing that. Like, she just lights up the room, whether you're talking to her on a phone, in a
Mm.
sense. So I see this it happening in a lot of different areas, and it's interesting. It's hard to really kind of understand exactly what that is.
Well, it's that the thing is that we can't think that we are what we care about, and so you can't think that if you spend your mind your day in dark thoughts or in dark passions or in dark interests, then how that will reverberate on your being. It'll show, right?
Mhm.
It'll show in subtle ways. It won't be explicit, but when when people meet you, they will get a sense very intuitively of what you are. And so if you spend your days grateful for that which you have, and you spend your days interceding in your heart for those that are struggling and caring for those around you, then that's going to show, and you're going to shine, and it's just, things are not arbitrary. Our attention has value, and the things we do, and the way we engage with people, even in secret, they have value. If you do something in secret, don't think it's not going to show. It's going to
Mhm.
show. It just won't show explicitly, but it'll show. People it'll show in the way you connect with others, and the way that they connect with you. And so
Yeah.
that's one of the secrets of obviously of religious life.
Yeah. No, 100%. And it's something that I've realized, that even small lies, even small manipulations, or whatever it may be, it has this type of effect. And I guess that brings me to the idea of sin. This was a huge insight that's come upon me in the last year, of idea of what sin is. Because when I started doing the Jesus prayer, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, a sinner. And I'm telling my son about this prayer, and he says, what is sinner? What does it mean I'm a sinner? So I'm like, how do I explain to my 6-year-old that we're all sinners? And this idea is that I told him, well, some throughout the day, we do things that, we miss the mark. We do things that we shouldn't have done. And all we're doing is asking for forgiveness of that, and to sin is to miss the mark. And if we think of the 10 Commandments, which, seems something so archaic. Oh yeah, what are these 10 rules? Why would God care if you're jealous of your neighbor's things? Why would he care if you're wanting to sleep with his wife? What a strange God to care about that. But it's like, no, if you have these thoughts, these intentions, it will have disintegrating effects on the relationships that you have with yourself
Yeah.
and with your family and with your work life. But if you focus on, not having, like pornography is a big thing for young men. You see that inflaming of the passions in terms of pornography is just obviously destructive. And for so long we were like, oh, porn is great, but not, it's free online. Nobody makes money off it, in a sense. There don't even sells advertising. Why is it free? And the effects that is having, pointing to the relationships in people's lives. Same thing if you're jealous of your neighbor's stuff. He gets a new car, you have to get a new car. So it goes again, like what you care about kind of determines who you are. And that's
That's
why
right.
everything else becomes an ideology or idolatry. If you focus on money, on power, on wealth, on reputation, even if you attain those things, that will destroy you. That's what
Yeah.
I think a midlife crisis is. You get,
Yeah.
you get all these things that the society told you, and you realize it was a trick, and now you're just, it destroys your identity, because you identify with money, then you get it, that's not it. Or identify with power, you get it, that's not it. And then when you run out of stuff, you have no identity. You cling to things. You just look for anything, a new Ferrari, a new girlfriend, a divorce,
Yeah.
or whatever it is. So I think this idea of going to the highest high, and this is something that I've gotten from you and from Jordan Peterson. Like if you aim at the highest, right, that will order your way and structure your life in a way where your relationships will work out. I think it all comes back to that. And in my life, the effect that symbolism has is the effects it has on your relationships, you know,
Yeah.
with self and
Surprise,
other.
surprise, huh? You'd think, why
Yeah.
would something like that have an effect on my relationship? But
Yeah.
the thing is that this is something that I try to bring across, and it's hard to bring across, is the inevitability of worship. You know, the idea that you are what you care about, and that what you care about and what you're aiming for, those two things actually will go together, because you can't aim for something if you don't care about it.
Mm-hmm.
Those two things go together, and then that will order your reality, you know, and so you end up, so worship ends up being just an inevitable part of what you are. So it's best to be deliberate about it and to worship the highest. And say, if you worship the highest, then like you said, you'll be surprised to find that things will lay themselves out, you know, after that, downstream from that, because things are embedded into each other. So if you worship the God that is love, then that will also, it'll inform all the other aspects of your reality, you know. So
Yeah. You got to get people to try it. How do you get people to authentically just try it for a year? You know, like
I don't
just
know.
give it a shot. And you know, this, and I won't keep you too much longer. The idea
Yeah.
of like Christ, the idea has so much, like the word has so much baggage, right? But the
Yeah.
idea of Christ is this unifying force that orders hierarchy. And Christ came into the world, right? And I wish it wasn't even called a religion. And you know, sometimes it's called a religion. It's not a religion because it's showing you how to order your relationships appropriately, which has this fractal effect on how you build a house, how you build a community, how you build a city. Right? If you can speak a little bit to that, because I hear you talk about it, it's interesting. This idea of Christ is applicable to material phenomenon in terms of city planning and all the way up. How can
Yeah.
we best
Well,
explain that to people?
so one of the things that is inevitable, you could say, in the world is hierarchy. So hierarchy, we've talked about this. So hierarchy is inevitable. It's going to happen. You can't get rid of it. And ancient societies have always recognized that, which is why they had very strict social hierarchies, very strict, relationships, separations between the elites and the slaves, and all of this in between. And so it's a rough world. Like, it's a rough thing. But there's something about that which is off. And this is what Christ has come to show, is that Christ has come to show that the top of the hierarchy of something appears as a giving of itself to that which is below.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's not just the idea of the top of the hierarchy, which rules the bottom. Right. So, but that's true. Like, that's also true. The thing which binds things together, the head, the king, the principality, the thing that binds a bunch of stuff together has to have a certain amount of rule on it, because that's how you hold, one of the ways you hold things together. But it also ends up being a form of sacrifice,
Mm-hmm.
which moves down into the parts. So that's, I think, that key is it's such a huge key to understanding how reality can find balance, and how you can find a balance between the inevitable hierarchy, but also the capacity for things to exist in peace, you could say.
Yeah.
And so Christ comes, and he comes to fill up the hierarchy. And so he gives himself, and then he ends up moving all the way down into death. So he goes all the way down, he takes everything on himself and goes all the way to the bottom, and then brings everything, and then brings it up to the top. And so that's why you have like this death, this resurrection, which is an ancient pattern, right? At the katabasis, this idea of
Mm-hmm.
going into the underworld and coming out of the underworld. And you see it in all kinds of myths, like every culture has a myth of going down into the underworld and coming out, right? So that's the ultimate story. But Christ does it in a way that no one else does.
Mm-hmm.
So Christ doesn't visit the underworld, right? Christ doesn't go just to save one person from the underworld. Christ doesn't get just a treasure from the underworld. Christ goes and abolishes death.
Yeah.
He goes to the end of death and then changes death into glory. And we have all these songs about how death, it's very mysterious, but the idea that death no longer has any power, it's gone. And that's also because of this sacrifice, this sacrificial hierarchy. And I think that's the key. It's like, that's why the societies that end up functioning the best are the societies that will have embodied that. The families that end up working the best are the societies, the families where, the children are submit to the parents, but the parents exist in order to give themselves to their children. Yeah. I mean, when I say it that way, everybody will say, well, yeah, of course, but that's not how it was in like Roman times. That's not how it was. The Roman father had choice of life and death on his kids and could decide which child would live and which child would die. And he would rule his house like a little tyrant, and he could rape any of his slaves, and he could do whatever he wanted. And so that is not a Christian hierarchy, right? Mm-hmm. The Christian hierarchy is the knight who fights, but fights for the weak, fights for those that need his protection, rather than just fighting for his own wealth and his own glory. So
yeah, beautiful. I think that it's applicable, obviously, to the family unit. But when you think of the word boss, it has a negative connotation. But if you have a leader or someone that embodies this sacrificial, kind of idea, I think you can have a workforce, and you can have corporations that embody this. And it seems so alien to think of these corporate structures. I mean, these Christian fundamental structures could fix corporations. And I think that's missing in, I really appreciate Jordan Hall and John Vervaeke in the Game B group, because they're really talking about changing the incentive structures and building a society that's not game theoretic and whatnot, but they're missing this glaring piece. Like, they're missing this piece, that thing that binds us. They're missing Christ. But how do you translate that to that kind of program there? But yeah, it's preaching. I think I'm gonna have Jordan on, and I saw when you had a conversation with him. Yeah, there was this sticking point where you're talking about these exact terms here, and he's like, well, he's talking about how do you do that with billions of people? Like, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna need a bigger boat or something like that. How do you apply that to a global arena? But I don't think that's the right question. I think
the thing is that it's not the right question. I've been thinking about that, really. And if we build it bottom up, right, then the question doesn't have to be asked at the highest level. That is, if your families run right, and then your cities run right, and your countries run right, and people are directed in the right direction, then at the higher levels, there will be peace, and it'll happen, and there will always be tension at the borders, but that tension doesn't have to be a kind of all out war of, I don't think we're ever going to get rid of conflict, but I think that we can create enough peace so that the tension at the borders won't be overwhelming. And if you think that you're going to create a system that will create a unified system which will create world peace, then man, I'm running away from you, because that's what the 666 is, right? That's what the Tower of Babel is. That's the problem of human pride. We need to, there'll always be multiplicity, and there'll always be, in this fallen world, you would say, there's always going to be tension at the borders. That's just inevitable.
Yeah. Well said. I guess last question here. So what does your wife and kids think about symbolism and your thrust into this cultural conversation over the last couple of years?
It's an interesting thing. I mean, my son really gets it. He's 15. And he's more on the order side, which is interesting. Like he seems, he's more like conservative, and he has a, how can I say this? He's definitely more on the right side, like kind of the straight side, you would say. And my daughter, she's just 13, and she's on the other side, man. She is really understanding and kind of seeing the margin and the monster and all this stuff. Like she's really seeing that. And so So I've been trying to have a lot of discussions with her on that and the dangers, opportunities and dangers of that stuff, because it's dangerous. So I'm seeing them mostly embody it, like it just kind of embody this reality. My wife is interesting because my wife, I would say, she has an intuitive understanding of symbolism, very, very intuitive. When I try to explain it, I don't think she finds it interesting, which is probably good for my soul. But she has a really, really deep intuitive understanding of it. And so sometimes she'll describe some experience that she's had in prayer. She's like, I had this experience and I had this kind of this glimpse of something, and she's talking to me, and it's like she's basically quoting St. Gregory of Nyssa without ever even knowing who he is or caring who he is. And so I'm like, well, yeah, church fathers talk about this way and everything. And she's like, oh, okay, well, that's good to know that I'm good to know that this experience I've had is other people have talked about it. So that's kind of how. But I would say they're not interested explicitly. My son a little more, but they're not that interested explicitly in symbolism.
Yeah. Well, that resonates a lot because my same thing with my 6-year-old. He loves to talk about it and discuss it. And my wife, she embodies it. And I don't know, like, I think she has the masculine and feminine balanced, like heaven and earth in her, because she has just this intuitive way of going about it. And I think she's healing me, like that. A woman like that heals the masculine, that is as integrated like that. And she's not interested in the, talking about it, but she,
Which is totally fine, by the way.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. She helps me see it. She helps me live it. And, she inspires me. And I think that relationships like that and conversations like this give me hope. And I do have a lot of hope, man. And I'll let you go there, man. I appreciate you very much, Jonathan, for coming on. Anything you'd like to add before
I would say I just want to thank you as well for putting all this time into analyzing, important texts and reading them online and kind of giving your thoughts and joining strange things that make, like talking about Father Seraphim Rose, but Marshall McLuhan, and then Matthieu's book and everything, which I know it's all kind of connecting together. And so I really appreciate seeing you do that work. And so I encourage everybody to come on your channel and subscribe and follow you. So I would say, yeah, all the best. Like, I think there's a few of us that are kind of on this path together, and hopefully we can keep building and this is the future. There's the future. The future is symbolic. Like, there's no way around that. And so the question is, what is it going to be, an upside down version of it, or is it going to be a normal version of it? And so we need to try to help shine light on the best versions of this pattern.
Yeah. Beautifully said, man. Thank you, Jonathan. God bless.
All right.